Welcome to our webinar today. Our webinar topic today is anxiety and school refusal. Our presenter is Don Midkiss. Just a reminder, if there are other topics you'd like to see covered in one of our webinars, please contact me at dale.gasparovic@prevention.org. Also, you can follow us on Twitter at SACenterPF for announcements of our new webinars being added to the website. Or you can email me once again at dale.gasparovic@prevention.org to join our Student Assistance Center group site, which is a networking site for all student assistance professionals. I'm going to turn it over here to Don Midkiss for our presentation. Just give me a second to do that. And Don, it is all yours.
All right, fantastic. Okay, so let's make sure our technology is working. Fantastic. Okay, thank you, Dale. As Dale said, my name's Don Midkiss. I'm a consultant with the Student Assistance Center at Prevention First, and today we're going to be talking about anxiety and school refusal. There has been something of an epidemic with this particular issue in not only high schools, but middle schools and elementary schools as well. It's unfortunate we have a fairly significant percentage of our kids that are, for a number of reasons, are not exhibiting the type of resilience that we would hope, the type of grit that we would hope, and therefore are refusing or finding ways to not be in school. Which is a problem from the school perspective because you can't teach kids if they're not there. So, of course, the goal is to get the kids in school and readiness. And the focus of our webinar today will be to look at some of the factors that contribute or the etiology, the anxiety and school refusal, and some tips on what you can do in the school to help with that. There's been a number of places that have developed programs specifically geared towards treating anxiety and school refusal and are very effective. So we'll talk a little bit about that as well. We'll talk a little bit about what anxiety disorders in youth are. There are different types. Talk a little bit about the types of treatment for anxiety and talk a little bit about interventions in schools and what you guys can do. So in general, anxiety disorders, they're the most common mental health issue amongst youth and amongst the general population. Anxiety disorders are very prevalent. Depending on what study you look at, can range from 10 to 20% to a level that's clinically significant, meaning that the anxiety is impairing them in some way. In kids with internalizing disorders such as anxiety, they're less identified than those that have issues that they externalize their problems. So kids with internalizing problems aren't the kids that tend to come on the radar as easily for the primary identifiers for issues with kids, which are parents and schools. If a kid is quietly suffering with anxiety in the back of the room and not saying anything, they're not necessarily going to jump on the radar of a teacher or a social worker or a counselor as a kid that's acting out and is a behavioral issue and is being dragged down to the dean's office on a daily basis, substance abuse, things of that nature that are very obvious signs that there's something going on. Anxiety can present as a very quiet issue. And anxiety disorders are frequently comorbid with other types of mood disorders, and sometimes they're comorbid with externalizing disorders. The thing about anxiety is what we refer to as ego dystonic. People don't like being anxious. Anxiety is a normal part of life. We all have some level of anxiety during all of our waking hours. The only time we don't experience anxiety is when we're sleeping. So we all have a level of stress and anxiety at every point of the day, but it's on a scale. There's a range there, and for those that deal with high levels of anxiety over periods of time, they may experiment with other behaviors that might help alleviate or distract them from their anxiety. So it's not uncommon for those with anxiety disorders to start doing things like experimenting with drugs and alcohol. It's not unusual for them to engage in other types of behaviors such as disordered eating or non-suicidal self-injury. And the ego dystonic feelings of anxiety that someone might feel might develop into feelings of hopelessness or despair that things won't change, and that can roll into a depressive disorder. So anxiety, if you're dealing with a kid that is presenting with anxiety as an issue, it's usually in your best interest to dig a little deeper and ask questions about if they're dealing with any other issues or problems, because they may very well be. So the functional impairment, the way in anxiety causes issues for folks in their functionality in children, it can create difficulties in peer relationships. If you have troubles with anxiety getting in the way of social interactions, and are perceived by your peers, especially in elementary and middle school, as the awkward kid, that can interfere with the development of peer relationships and can also lead to being targeted for those that engage in bullying behaviors. It can also lead to poor academic achievement. So if the anxiety manifests itself in a way that the child has trouble with performance in higher pressure situations such as tests or exams, that can have an adverse impact on their ability to perform academically despite their talent or ability level. And also in children, it's again commonly comorbid with other disorders. In adults, the functional impairments are somewhat similar: relationship impairments, occupational disability, and you make the argument that the occupation of children is being a student. So we see this as well with adults. It can also develop, people can also develop what are called somatic complaints, or issues that are anxiety related, where the anxiety manifests as some form of physical discomfort or pain. In having worked in emergency rooms and assessing folks that came in there with behavioral health related issues, it wasn't uncommon for someone to present with what they claimed was a cardiac incident or a heart attack. And after doing an EKG and cardiac enzyme labs and all this stuff, and everything coming back normal, what it was an anxiety attack. So anxiety can manifest in somatic issues as well. And we already touched on that substance use can potentially be a comorbid condition for someone with anxiety. Yes, Dale?
Might these students who are experiencing this level of anxiety, might they show up often at the nurse's office?
That's an excellent point, Dale. The stomach ache, the infamous non-specific abdominal pain, is a very common complaint amongst those with anxiety with school refusal, and we'll talk a little bit about this later, why it's important for school personnel to have a good plan and have everyone on board when you have a student that's dealing with significant anxiety that's taking them out of school, is allowing them to avoid their anxiety triggers is not helpful. We'll cover that, why that is. So yes, absolutely, that's a good red flag, is a child that's repeatedly going to the nurse's office for physical complaints that don't have a basis in an actual physical ailment. And if it tends to be in the same time of day or the same period, or it's always at lunchtime, or it's always at gym time, that's another sign that there's something that they're trying to avoid because it's triggering anxiety. So there's a number of different anxiety disorders. Anxiety disorders is an umbrella for a number of specific disorders. So that includes separation anxiety disorder, generalized anxiety disorder, social anxiety disorder. It also covers phobias, panic disorder, agoraphobia, which is if someone doesn't want to leave the house, fear of going outside, obsessive compulsive disorder, and PTSD, or post-traumatic stress disorder. The ones that you most commonly see in the school setting are going to be the first three in purple: the separation, the GAD, and the social anxiety disorder. The others are less frequently seen, but are all fall under the heading of anxiety disorders and have similar treatment modalities to address them. So again, anxious youth in schools, the problems may be less apparent than youth with behavioral disorders. Our schools tend to identify kids with behavioral health needs first in the spectrum of those that make themselves obvious or known to have issues. So kids that are behaviorally acting out, getting in fights, angry, breaking school rules, coming to school under the influence, or coming to school with paraphernalia or drugs. These are all things that are very, make it, again, very apparent that this kid has an issue that needs to be addressed. Kids with anxiety, again, they may appear to be perfectionistic or good kids, although they might be performing poorly in school because of their anxiety around high-pressure situations. These tend to be the good kids, and oftentimes in schools, we are in a position where we pay attention more to the bad kids than to the good kids, because the good kids are not causing us problems or causing difficulties. So we're less likely to identify when they have an issue or a problem. Again, somatic complaints are often more frequent. We see this. There's been some studies done that show that that's particularly true in minority youth. And for some kids, that anxiety can also present as oppositional behavior. And that's more in the terms of avoiding tasks or refusing to come to school, to the point where there's perhaps an attendance review board violation of attendance policy that puts that kid in risk of being dropped from classes or dropped from school altogether. The thing about school refusal and school avoidance, and this is just to clear up some perhaps misconceptions about it. It's more than just school jitters. It's not. There's some very real reasons why these kids are avoiding school, and it's not to be confused with truant children that, again, any child that's truant, there's a story there that it's in our best interest to explore. Truancy can be because of many issues, including taking care of their parents, or because that they're involved with substances. There's any number of reasons someone might be truant. But the truancy is often a symptom of a deeper issue that should be explored and connected with the right type of service or addressed in the correct way. School refusal, anywhere up to 5%, depending on the study you look at, up to 5% of our kids are impacted by anxiety to the point where they refuse or avoid school. And a pretty significant chunk of kids refuse school at some time during their school career for, again, numerous reasons. The most common ages that are affected are at transition times. Not surprising. Those that suffer from anxiety, change is difficult and hard. So at 5, 6 years old, when they're entering into kindergarten, into that structured school day, having to separate from mom and or dad, who may have commanded their attention, for now they're being put in this different or larger environment with their peers, and that can be frightening. 10, 11 years old, as they're transitioning from elementary to middle school, or any time of transition period. So if there's moving to a new school, going to a different school or a different cohort, there's any number of reasons after an illness, protracted illness, medical reason, medical leave. These are all things um, that can trigger a school anxiety or a school refusal issue. In general, these kids tend to be average to above average intelligence. These are smart kids. The thing about anxiety is it's kids that are overthinking and thinking over and over about what the worst case scenario is. This is the terrible thing that's going to happen if I do this, which takes some for some kids that creativity and imagination and above average intelligence is working against them. So short-term and long-term consequences of the impact of school refusal. What's the downside? Of course, it's declining academic performance, social alienation. An anxious kid that refuses to go to school, on the time he comes to school, the kids start asking the question, "Hey, where were you?" Which only triggers the anxiety even more. Increased risk of legal trouble, financial expense for things such as tutors for catching up on school that they're missing, such as visits from truancy officers, although that's more and more of a rare occurrence, but that does happen. There are some municipalities that drag the parents into court. So, again, family conflict, lack of supervision. Mom and dad have to go to work. Kids refusing to go to school. What do? You leave them at home unsupervised. So that happens. So there's short-term risk. Long-term risk includes economic deprivation, lower educational attainment, so the possibility of not graduating. Occupational marital problems, because the more you avoid difficult situations, there are difficult situations in the workplace, in careers, in significant relationships. These are all things that are potentially impacted by long-term for those that have anxiety that goes unaddressed. And poor psychological functioning. There's a new, relatively new area of study on the concept of grit and resiliency in our kids, and this lowering of resiliency and the lack of grit that many of our children have is a significant contributor to school anxiety and school refusal. So it's the risk. The longer the kid remains out of school, hands down, is the higher the risk of some of these other issues occurring and becoming long-term problems. So the types of school refusal. So it's a heterogeneous condition. That means that there's not just one. We just can't say that, yes, the pancreas isn't producing enough insulin, therefore it's diabetes. There are multiple. There are four primary ways that people engage in school anxiety, school refusal. There's a psychologist out at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, Chris Kearney, Kearney, Chris Kearney, who's really been the national expert on this particular topic. He's written a number of books, and he breaks it down into four reasons why people engage in school anxiety, school refusal. So the first reason is to avoid school-related stimuli that provoke negative affectivity. What this is these are the kids that have a fear of failure academically. So rather than fail, they just won't go. I've had the opportunity to work with a number of kids that have had this particular issue, and there's one example that a colleague of mine shares is he worked with a young lady who was mere weeks away from graduating from college, and came in and said that I I'm going to be graduating and getting a degree in a major that I don't like, and there's a job waiting for me that I absolutely don't want to do. And the reason for that is the reason she spent 4 years working towards a degree that she didn't want in the field she didn't want to enter a career in was her freshman year. She saw in the major that she was looking to engage in that she had to give a speech as part of her senior thesis. She had to give a speech in front of her class, and that so freaked her out that she flipped through the course catalog, the major catalog for the school, until she found a major that did not require that sort of speech. And that's what she chose. She changed her major right then and there. So these sorts of things, the fear of failure, the fear of not being able to perform, is one way that anxiety can grow to a point where they will avoid or refuse school. To escape aversive social situations, these are the kids that are, by their perception, being bullied, and that could be their own perception despite reality, or it could very well be that they are being bullied, and that they're avoiding school to avoid that aversive social situation, avoid that rather than confront it. The thought of going to school and being in that situation with that particular person or group of people, so anxiety-provoking that they'd rather not go to school. Another reason, the third reason, is to receive attention from others outside of school. This is typically a parent or parents. These are the kids that they've had this experience in. You work with elementary or middle and sometimes high schools where you are literally peeling the child off of their mother, typically, to get them to come into school. These are also tend to be families that are overly enmeshed. Parents, and this is not unusual for parents to also be dealing with an anxiety issue as well, overly protective, where they tend to protect their kids from anything that might be potentially anxiety-provoking. Therefore, if they can just hang on to mom in that drop-off line, mom will more likely than not decide to put them back in the car and drive them home. The other is to obtain tangible rewards outside of school. If you're not at school, there's all sorts of fun stuff to do at home that is not at school. PlayStation, Xbox, cable, computer, internet, you name it. All those fun things that are available at home and comfortable at home and non-demanding of their energy or abilities or risk-taking. That might be the reason that they're avoiding school, is so they can do those other things. So those are the four main reasons. Again, it's fear of failure, to avoid things like bullying or being bullied, to receive attention from an outside source, typically a parent, or to be able to obtain some sort of reward outside of school, usually in the comfort of home, and doing things that are non-demanding or non-expectation of performance. So getting to asking a few questions can kind of get to the heart of what's driving this particular behavior. Why are they refusing to go to school? And that's going to inform how you intervene, or how a therapist or a family can intervene to change the direction of that. Because how you intervene with someone who's being avoiding aversive social situations is going to be different than how you intervene with someone that's looking to obtain tangible rewards outside of school. So one of the ways that we in the treatment field address anxiety is using of a form of cognitive behavioral therapy. So what's CBT? Is cognitive behavioral therapy, also known as CBT. It works with patients to modify those irrational thoughts or thought processes that will then trigger feelings, and that thought and feeling together will drive a person's behavior. So if your perception is if I speak, if I do this speech in front of a class and I make a mistake, they're all going to laugh at me. And that thought, whether it's rational or irrational, because in some cases maybe it is rational. Maybe they did see someone or has had a previous experience of being laughed at giving a speech. But that perception is that if they do that, then this is definitely going to happen. This is the worst case scenario, and absolutely this worst case scenario is going to happen. That's going to trigger feelings of anxiety, and that thought and feeling together will create a behavior. In this case, the behavior is to avoid school. If you avoid school, you're never going to have to give a speech in front of people. Therefore, you'll never get laughed at. So this is how these thought chains develop. We utilize a particular, in the treatment center that I work for, we treat school anxiety specifically. We have a specific school anxiety, school refusal program. And we utilize a particular treatment model that has probably the best amount of research behind it, called exposure response prevention therapy. It's more on the behavioral side of the cognitive behavioral therapy, but it is a form of CBT. Go back to this for a second. The idea behind ERP, or exposure response prevention therapy, is that people avoid because they feel they can't handle the situation, can't handle the consequences of what that would happen. So what we do is we work with exposing them to the things that trigger their anxiety in gradual steps. So to give you an example, someone who may, like myself, I don't care for spiders. I don't know if you call it full-fledged phobia, but in my mind, it's us or them. So if I wanted to work on extinguishing or eliminating this phobia of spiders, the last thing you want to do is jump right in and look at a box full of spiders. That would not be helpful. It would be very anxiety-provoking and not helpful, and probably reinforce that anxiety and that phobia. Rather, what you would do is you would start with what we call a low-level exposure. So a therapist might ask someone to just think of a spider. Just have that thought, the image come to mind. For someone with a significant phobia, that thought of a spider can be very anxiety-provoking. Excuse me. So having that low-level exposure, just thinking about it, and then working through that anxiety and going through some calming techniques, and showing the individual that they can handle that exposure, they can handle that anxiety. You practice that low-level exposure a few times, and that anxiety trigger loses power. It gets extinguished. It's replacing an irrational thought with a rational thought that I can handle this. I can think of spider and not have this anxiety triggered. And once you master that lower level, you can move up tiers and have more, moderate to high level exposures. And that moderate level exposure could be looking at a picture across the room of a spider, and you move it closer as you learn how to manage that anxiety, all the way up to actually handling a live spider, usually a tarantula, which is non-aggressive, and handling that anxiety. Now that's a very high level exposure. Our team has things like boxes of spider parts, like tarantulas that have passed away, that someone can handle, and as an exposure. So it can be very, our team gets very creative in how we structure and conduct exposures. Because each person responds a little bit differently, and you have to take a very gradual approach with it. And if if done with fidelity, ERP is extraordinarily effective in treating anxiety. So some of the behavioral features of school refusal, avoidance. When someone is anxious and highly anxious, their first instance anxiety is ego dystonic. It's uncomfortable. People don't like it. The avoidance becomes their first mechanism of defense. But the more you avoid something that triggers your anxiety, the more it maintains and makes the anxiety worse. It's tempting to, again, as it says, to avoid engaging with fears, but then they never fully experience success over conquering those fears. And that's really what reduces that anxiety. Again, that with the exposures, you're showing them that they can have success over persisting through those fears and seeing that the worst possible scenario doesn't come to pass as they had feared. There's an old saying about ERP that the only way out of the fire is through it, and that's true in this case. If there's, it's, and anxiety and avoidance can also, in the regards to those that are looking for attention from a parent or such, that this anxiety and avoidance can be positively reinforced. So if they avoid and they get all this attention from a parent they wouldn't necessarily get, that's very reinforcing. So it's not necessarily to avoid, but to get something, to get some sort of reward, either tangible or intangible, because they engage in these behaviors. So, I know that if I cry and beg and cling on to my mother, that she's going to take me home, and maybe we'll get to go to McDonald's Playland, and she's going to spend time with me, and she's going to tell me how much she loves me, and everything's going to be okay. The last thing you want to tell someone that is anxious is that everything is going to be okay, because you don't know that. Because those times when they have their worst fear, and if they do something and they do that thing, trying to conquer it, and the worst does happen, you've told them that it's okay, and now they don't believe you anymore. Now you are not reliable or trustworthy as someone that can help them, because you told them everything was going to be okay, and then it wasn't. So telling them that it's going to be okay is counterproductive. What we like to tell people is, you can handle it. It may not be okay, but you can handle it, whether it's okay or not. So it's part of also what is of ERP is to incorporate cognitions. That cognitive part of the cognitive behavioral therapy is to reinforce that sense of self-efficacy, that they can cope with a feared object, that they can persist through it, that they have the ability to, that they're challenging their cognitive biases. So their belief that they don't feel competent to cope with a danger, or that the probability of something bad or negative happening is very high, that they're overestimating the possibility of a negative outcome, and that they are much more likely to pay attention to those things that are emotionally threatening. So despite the fact that they might be told that they have, if they have a fear of speaking in front of people, you can tell them, you had these 5 speeches and they were all great, you got great grades on them. What they're going to focus on is that one speech, that one talk that they had to give in front of class, where they said and or but 3 or 4 times, and one kid chuckled at them when they mispronounced a word. Those other 5 don't matter. They might as well not exist for that kid, because they're more likely to to pay attention to those things that are perceived failures, or that reinforces their belief that something bad or negative is going to happen again. So as we talked about, anxious children often have anxious parents. So there's not only, and there is a genetic correlation between having an anxious parent and being genetically vulnerable to developing anxiety issues yourself. But they also model anxious behavior. If they see their parents avoiding things that are anxiety provoking as a child, that's where we learn as children, where we learn our first set of coping skills is by observing our parents and how our parents cope with things. It's that basic skill set of coping becomes the core of how we deal with adversity when we come across it as we grow. So, if you also have anxious parents, there's the phenomenon that people refer to as helicopter parenting. I'd like to think of as snowplow parenting, where the anxious parents that will knock down any potential adversity before their kid comes across it. So these are the folks that are coming to see your principals and your superintendents, and not my kid, and my kid is special. No, we can't do this, and no, we can't do that. Over controlling, overprotective. Maybe viewed by the kid as being less warm or affectionate and more rejecting. Because again, if someone is anxious, their worst case scenario could be that their kid is a failure. And they may be vocalizing those anxieties and fears in the presence of their kids, and those kids internalize those things. So here's some, there's a group out of Pennsylvania that put together a workbook for doing some CBT-based interventions in a school setting. So there's some things that if you have a larger population, you're thinking of providing some support for a kid or a group of kids that might be dealing with this particular issue. There's some things that can be, this particular model has had some research behind it, is shown to be somewhat effective. But the first part of it is really more psychoeducational. So learning about things that might trigger their anxiety, learning about different coping skills that would be helpful should the anxiety get triggered, and then fear, we'll talk about that in a second, plan. And then modeling some exposures in the school setting. The anxiety triggers are in school. School is the best place to do exposures. So developing a hierarchy or gradual and repeated practice to be able to engage in feared situations is helpful. Having parent sessions is, in this particular model, there are 2 parent sessions. And these parent sessions are, again, more psychoeducational to help the parents understand what their kid is dealing with or going through. And then school involvement that's part of the program, that if there's, if possible, if it's something that can be done during the school day, or if it's something that engaging the assistance of the teachers and staff at the school can be beneficial. So again, the part 1, psychoeducation and skill building. The idea is to build rapport, develop an understanding of that kid or that group of kids' experience with anxiety, to get a sense of what the 4 categories they're dealing with. And then psychoeducation comes in with recognizing feelings. How do I know that my anxiety is getting triggered or ramped up? What are some things that I should attend to physiologically? Is my heart beating faster? Do I feel, does my scalp get hot? Do my fingers tingle? And then, explore a little bit if there's If there's areas in the family system that might be, is this something? Well, my mom has the same thing. My dad, he chews his fingernails to the quick, and I do the same thing. So recognizing that there's some learned behaviors there, and then skill building. How do you cope with anxiety once it's triggered, or recognizing that it's starting to ramp up? What things can you do? So relaxation training, again, cognitive restructuring, and challenging those irrational beliefs. Problem solving, self-examination, self-reward. Hey, I did a good job. I really, I came through there. I handled that very well. And that positive self-talk can be helpful in reinforcing the use of the coping skills. So fear plan is, am I feeling frightened? Am I expecting bad things to happen? What are some, if the answers to both of those questions is yes, what kind of actions can I take or attitudes can I take that can be helpful in the situation, that I can manage that anxiety, and then taking a look at the results and the rewards, the benefits for handling that appropriately. So fear pyramid, this is just a sample of what you might work on with a kid as far as developing a fear pyramid. What's something that at bottom level, on the red level, these are the things that are slightly anxiety provoking. So if the fear is speaking in front of the class and making a mistake, a red level fear trigger might be speaking to someone that are unfamiliar with. So having a conversation with a stranger, because they might fear they're being judged socially, and moving that up to writing a speech that they would potentially do in front of the class, and that could move up to standing up and answering one question in front of the teacher asks a question and volunteering to answer that question. Even whether or not they get picked, just the act of volunteering could be an exposure. When we get to some really high-level exposures with someone like that, we may actually have them do a speech in front of the group, purposely make mistakes during the speech, and have the group laugh at them. It's their worst fear. It's beyond their worst fear. But then they, at that very high level, if they've been working the hierarchy up until that point, they can engage in their scoping skills and handle that worst possible situation and be okay. And then we'll be able to handle doing a speech in front of the class, whether or not they make mistakes. So practice exposures. We'll go places and do things. To do the exposures, the exposure is a situation that's anxiety provoking. The aim is not to remove the anxiety, but be able to manage it. It's still going to be anxiety provoking, but they need to learn how to manage it and handle it, and persist through it. They should be given opportunities to practice things in their hierarchy, and again, it could be step by step. Repetition is key. Doing a little of exposure and go, oh, that went well, moving on, is not adequate. You need to practice it and repeat it until there's certainty that trigger has lost some power over that kid. And here's one of the keys that I learned in working with school anxiety kids, because you can get a kid that comes into your room, comes into your office at 8 in the morning and says, gosh, I can't go to class, I can't do it, I'm really scared about what's going to happen in math class first period, I can't do it, and you spend 15 minutes talking them up and going, yep, and getting them pointing in the right direction and say, right, now go to math class, here's your pass. And then you see them again at noon, and they've been in the nurse's office all morning because they didn't go to math class, they went to the nurse's office instead. So it's getting out of our offices, going to those situations with the kids, and staying with them until they are past the threshold of that anxiety trigger. So for them, what might stop them is actually walking to class. So actually, partnering with that teacher and saying, hey, this is what we're doing. walking into class and sitting down with that kid, and until they tell you that the anxiety is starting to lessen, that's your cue to go, and that's okay. But if you don't take that step of going with them and working with it through it with them, the chances of them persisting just based on discussion is going to be minimal. So go places and do things with them, and you have a lot more success with this particular practice. So the thing about exposures, they're collaborative. You got to know in advance, and you have to agree to it. So that's when that peer pyramid is developed. It's developed collaboratively. It's not something that a counselor or social worker or therapist does and hands it to and says, this is what we're going to do. It's something that's done together. And then in session preparation. So practice role play before you know what's likely going to happen when we go and do this exposure. And then afterwards, after going through the exposure, process it. How did they think they did? Make sure that they feel rewarded or positively reinforced if after the exposure, even if the exposure was a failure, the fact that they engaged in it should be reinforced. And then they should also be practicing exposures that you've already worked on in session, so to speak, at home as well. They need to do homework. It's just not happening. If it's just happening in the office, so to speak, it's not going to be as effective, or it'll take longer to take root. So again, we talked about CBT. Some of the research that's been done has shown that therapy plus some form of SSRI, which are antidepressant medications, provide the biggest impact as far as response rates. 81% response is huge for anything in regards to psychological treatment of any disorder. 81% is a huge response rate. The thing that should be avoided is giving medications that are anti-anxiety medications that are tranquilizing. So things like Klonopin, Ativan, and Valium. These are medications that actually help that individual avoid the anxiety. So it makes the therapy process less effective if someone is on one of those types of medications. What an SSRI or antidepressant does is provide some mood stabilization and makes some of the more intense feelings less intense, and makes them better able to engage and benefit from the therapy process. So again, we talked a little bit about this. These medications really, an SSRI, particularly with kids, really needs to be managed by someone who knows what they're doing. It says pediatrician or psychiatrist, but really a psychiatrist should be managing these sorts of things, because pediatricians often don't have the expertise to fine-tune dosing. And SSRIs in general take a month or two to really kick in. So it's not something that's going to take effect right away. That's the unfortunate allure of drugs like Klonopin and Xanax, the benzodiazepines, the tranquilizing medications, is that they work in anxiety. They work really well, and they work immediately. Again, the problem is that they're a distractor, and it's something that will reinforce the anxiety.
Hey, Don, this is something that I think is really, really important for the school staff who will be implementing interventions with kids, for them to help parents to understand that 4 to 8 week time frame, because the parents need to continue to dose their children. I think a lot of times we get into situations where parents don't understand that, and so they don't appropriately dose, and they only do it when the anxiety is taking place. And so they don't do it in other times, which obviously decreases the effectiveness of those medications.
Absolutely, it would have no impact whatsoever if it's taken intermittently. These are medications that need to build up to a therapeutic level in someone's system before they have the effect that you want them to, which is to help with reducing some of the worst of the anxiety symptoms. That's where the psychoeducation comes in, and why the copycat model that we talked about a little bit before recommends that the 2 parent sessions is to be able to educate the parents about the condition and about the things such as being consistent with these types of medications, whether or not they're feeling anxious, or else they won't have the intended impact. And that's, again, where having a psychiatrist manage the medications is much more beneficial than having a pediatrician, because they understand the pharmaceutical dynamics far better than a pediatrician does. So again, CBT, including ERP, is a well-established treatment, although it's highly underutilized. I mean, the thing about ERP is it takes structure and it takes commitment, because you're doing something repetitively with someone. It does take some amount of persistence to do effectively. And if you're in a situation where you feel like you can't do something like that in your building, then identifying and partnering with someone in the community that can. That's really the key. Is, a lot of schools, most schools, frankly, aren't set up to do something like this in school. If you can, that's fantastic. If you can't, having an understanding of what makes an effective treatment of school anxiety and school refusal is crucial in being able to identify a community partner. If the community partner doesn't utilize CBT, or in particular ERP, for treating this condition, the chances of that kid responding to the treatment are much lower. The thing about most traditional therapies, talk therapy isn't very effective for anxiety. You can't talk someone out of being anxious. And the reason for that is that anxiety is taking place in the parts of the brain, like the amygdala and the hippocampus, that are not connected to your language centers. They're pre-verbal parts of your brain. So anxiety is something you can't be talked out of, so to speak. So that's you have to actually walk them through the fire, so to speak, to get them to work through and eliminate their anxiety. So why is this underutilized? Why is behavioral health services underutilized in general, not just for anxiety, but in general? There's a number of barriers, and those barriers keep getting more significant month after month, year after year. Access is one thing. Capacity of mental health services has been getting lower and lower throughout the state. There are mental health centers that are closing, seems like every day, and it pretty much is every day. There's some service that's being reduced or eliminated because of we have a current budget crisis. So that's impacting the ability to receive services. The other part is the ability to seek services, or the willingness to seek services when it's recommended. So it's also engagement by the family. So with that, we're just about at time. This is my contact information. Do feel free to shoot me an email or give me a call if you have a question about this particular topic. It's something that is not going away in the foreseeable future. Common Core is not going to address it. RTI isn't necessarily going to address it either. But it's something there is some treatment available out there, and there are some things that you can do in the school building to help mitigate it. And most importantly is knowing what it is when it comes across your threshold, and being armed with some information to share with parents on how it can be effectively treated is crucial.
All right.
Thanks for your time and attention.
Thank you, Don. I appreciate your information today, and look forward to working with you again in the future. Just a reminder that if you would like to see a specific topic covered in one of of our webinars. Don't forget to contact me at my email address. Also, you can follow us on Twitter and find out what is upcoming on our webinars that you can connect to, or you can email me to join our networking site at the Student Assistance Center group site. Thank you so much and have a great day.